Before we begin, if you enjoy intense sci-fi stories where humanity stands toe-to-toe with the universe's deadliest forces, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're listening from. Your support helps these stories reach more listeners, and stay until the end because what happens to this human changes how the entire galaxy sees our species. The galaxy called it dead space, a region so hostile that even automated probes refuse to return intact telemetry. On every star chart, the Predator's territory appeared as a black scar, a void where trade routes bent away and civilized species pretended nothing existed. The official designation was Karzun Expanse, but among spacers it was known by a simpler name, the Mouth. Once you crossed its boundary, you were considered already swallowed. Elias Kane studied that dark blot on his navigation console without blinking. He had seen worse maps before, kill zones drawn in red, evacuation routes that led nowhere, planets marked lost while people were still screaming on the comms. This one felt familiar. Final. The kind of place commanders warned you about just before telling you there was no alternative. His ship, a stripped-down recon cutter barely held together by stubborn engineering, drifted at the edge of the expanse. Long-range sensors spat static. Even the stars looked wrong past that invisible line, dimmed as if something immense were breathing between them and the light. Kane ran a gloved hand along the scar on his jaw, a habit from another life, and leaned back into his seat. They said nothing lived in Karzun except predators. Not animals, judges. Things that didn't hunt for hunger but for balance. Entire fleets had vanished after ignoring the warnings, snapped out of existence with no debris, no distress calls, no survivors to tell the story differently. The Galactic Council eventually agreed on a single rule: do not enter. No surveys. No mercy missions. No exceptions. Humans, as always, had read that rule like a dare. Elias Kane wasn't here on behalf of Earth or any flag still pretending to matter. Officially, he was a civilian contractor performing salvage reconnaissance. Unofficially, he was a veteran with nowhere left to run. The war he'd survived, or failed to finish depending on who you asked, had burned the noise out of him. The medals were gone, sold for transport credits. The unit was gone, buried on a moon that no longer bothered with a name. What remained was discipline, muscle memory, and a persistent sense that something unfinished was waiting for him out here. The moment his ship crossed the threshold, everything went silent. No alarms. No dramatic explosion. Just the sudden absence of feedback, as if the universe had muted itself. The NAV console froze mid-calculation. The reactor hummed lower, not failing but afraid. Kane exhaled slowly and cut auxiliary chatter, trusting habits older than the ship beneath him. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't curse. Panic wasted oxygen. The terrain below resolved into view as the ship descended, a vast expanse of jagged obsidian plains split by river-like scars of faintly glowing stone. The ground looked clawed apart, reshaped repeatedly by forces that had never cared about symmetry. Kane set the cutter down near a ridge formation that would shield it from orbital scans, if scans still worked here, and stepped onto the planet. The air was breathable. That alone unsettled him. Each step pressed into ash-like soil that shifted, then settled as if remembering his weight. The quiet wasn't empty. It felt watched. Kane's instincts, sharpened by decades of ambush drills and battlefield losses, screamed at him to keep moving, to never let the terrain dictate the fight. He obeyed without consciously deciding to, rifle held low but ready, eyes tracking shadows that didn't quite match the stone formations that cast them. That was when the ground vibrated. Not an impact. Not an earthquake. A rhythm. Slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. The vibration traveled up through his boots and into his bones, syncing with his heartbeat before overriding it. Whatever was approaching wasn't running. It didn't need to. Kane stopped. He could retreat to the ship. Protocol said he should. Survival statistics were unanimous. But protocols had abandoned him long before this planet ever made a map. He planted his feet, adjusted his stance, and waited. The pressure in the air deepened, compressing sound into something thick and oppressive. Somewhere beyond the ridge, something vast shifted its weight. Kane felt it before he saw it, a presence that bent attention toward it like gravity. Every survival instinct told him he was prey. Every lesson he'd ever survived whispered another truth just beneath the fear. Predators respected clarity. When the massive shadow finally crested the ridge, blocking out what little starlight remained, Kane didn't raise his weapon. He lowered it. Not in surrender but in acknowledgement. The choice cost him a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The thing's eyes, too large, too knowing, fixed on him. And for the first time since entering the Mouth, Elias Kane understood the real conflict wasn't about whether he would survive this place. It was about what would claim him first: the predator that ruled this world or the part of himself that had been waiting all along to be found. The creature did not strike. That alone shattered everything Elias Kane had been taught to expect. Predators lunged, tested, took advantage of hesitation. This one remained still, its immense silhouette outlined against a sky bruised with faint stellar light. Kane's muscles burned from the effort of not reacting. His breath slowed by will alone as he measured the distance, the angle, the inevitability of failure if he was wrong. The eyes watched him without blinking. Up close, the predator was larger than any naval dropship Kane had ever exited at full burn. Its hide resembled layered obsidian plates, each segment etched with pale scars that curved in deliberate patterns. These were not wounds left by desperation or frenzy. They were marks of survival, of contest. The creature's head lowered just enough to bring one vast amber eye level with Kane's own. There was intelligence there. Not metaphorical, not hopeful. Actual, assessing awareness. Kane had faced sentient enemies before, species capable of speech, diplomacy, and cruelty, but this was different. This mind did not reach outward. It drew everything inward, weighing him the way gravity weighed mass. The ground shifted beneath Kane's boots, not from movement but from tension. Around them, lesser shapes skittered back into crevices and shadowed stone, as if the land itself recognized hierarchy. Kane felt suddenly, acutely singular. The predator inhaled. The sound rolled across the plain, deep and resonant, carrying with it a pressure that made Kane's vision blur at the edges. Images rose unbidden in his mind. Not memories forced upon him, but impressions brushing against something unguarded. Blood drying on gloves. The weight of a rifle after firing until the barrel screamed. Faces he avoided thinking about because they never stayed silent once invited in. Kane gritted his teeth and held his ground. He realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that he was being tested. Not for strength. The predator had no need to measure that. If it desired him dead, the outcome would already be inevitable. This scrutiny reached deeper, past the reflexes drilled into him by human militaries, down to the patterns that remained when everything else was stripped away. The predator circled him. Each step was careful, unhurried, the movement of something that had never feared an ambush. Kane pivoted slowly to keep it in view, refusing to let panic dictate speed. His weapon remained lowered, powered but inactive. He knew drawing a bead would end the encounter, and not in his favor. As the creature completed its slow orbit, the pressure in Kane's skull intensified. A low pulse echoed through his chest, synchronous with the predator's movement. He felt himself being peeled open, layers of restraint examined and set aside. Not violated, understood. The predator stopped in front of him again. A massive forelimb lifted, claws longer than Kane's arm gleaming dully in the half-light. The air went still. Lesser predators had frozen completely, embedded in the terrain like statues awaiting permission to breathe. Kane recognized the moment instinctively. Decision. He forced himself to remember why he was here. Not the salvage contract. Not the council's arbitrary borders. He had come because survival without purpose had grown heavier than the risk of death. Because when everything else had been taken, the part of him that endured still needed something worthy of standing against. Kane dropped his knee to the ground. It was not submission. His spine stayed straight, his gaze level. The motion was calculated, familiar from ancient drill formations humanity had carried from one battlefield to the next for centuries. A warrior's acknowledgement of another who could end him, and had chosen not to yet. The predator's claw hovered inches from his chest. For one stretched, impossible second, Kane felt the full weight of the creature's attention press into him, and then something shifted. The crushing pressure eased, replaced by something colder, sharper. Focus. The claw descended. It did not strike his heart. It carved a shallow line across the armor plating over his shoulder, slicing through composite materials as if they were paper. The impact spun Kane sideways and drove him into the ash, pain searing through his nerves. Before he could react, the force was gone. He rolled to his knees, breath ragged, expecting the killing blow. It never came. Instead, heat bloomed along the cut. Not fire, something denser. The wound sealed itself in a pattern that made his skin prickle, a residue left behind that pulsed faintly beneath the armor. Kane stared at it, disbelief momentarily overriding discipline. The predator had marked him. The creature stepped back, its posture altering subtly. The tension that had locked the surrounding terrain released. Sounds returned, wind hissing across stone, distant movements echoing through caverns. The lesser shapes emerged again, cautious but no longer hiding in outright fear. Kane pushed himself upright, every sense screaming for him to retreat, yet aware that the encounter had not ended. The predator lowered its massive head once more, not in threat but in intent. Kane understood then that the violence he'd expected had never been the point. He had not been spared. He had been chosen. As the predator turned away and began to withdraw into the jagged plains, an unfamiliar sensation spread through Kane's chest. Not triumph. Not relief. Recognition. The planet no longer felt hostile in the same way. The silence that followed the creature's departure carried weight, not menace. Kane stood alone beneath the warped sky, the mark on his armor cooling as it settled into place. Somewhere in the depths of the territory the predator's presence receded, but it did not vanish. And Elias Kane knew, with the certainty of a veteran who had learned to trust the moments before everything changed, that leaving this place would be far more dangerous now than entering it had ever been. Elias Kane made it back to civilization with a ship that looked less like it had traveled through space and more like it had clawed its way out of something that didn't want to let go. The moment his recon cutter crossed into regulated trade lanes, every dormant system on the craft lurched back to life at once, as if relieved to be observed again. Automated distress beacons activated without his input. Patrol vessels rerouted before he even finished transmitting clearance codes. By the time he set down at the nearest orbital station, the rumors were already ahead of him. Medical personnel met him at the docking bay with a level of caution normally reserved for hazardous materials. No one touched him without gloves. Every scanner in the bay was pointed in his direction, all of them producing contradictory data. The mark beneath his armor confused their instruments, bending readings in subtle ways that suggested biological activity without matching any known signature. Kane endured the examinations in silence. He let them peel back his armor, catalog the shallow scar on his shoulder, and argue in hushed voices about what it was doing instead of what it was. He did not mention the pressure he still felt at the back of his mind, the faint awareness of movement far beyond the station's hull. He doubted they would believe him, and he doubted it would change anything. It took less than 6 hours for the Galactic Council to issue a provisional quarantine order. Emergency sessions convened across species lines that rarely shared oxygen, all reacting to the same impossible report. A human had entered the mouth and returned alive. Not injured. Not rescued. Marked. Surveillance footage from Kane's ship, distorted and incomplete as it was, spread through sealed data channels like a contagion. No predator was visible, yet the absence itself terrified them. In the expanse, nothing went unseen unless it wished to. The official concerns centered on what Kane represented. Predators like the one that ruled Karzun were treated as natural disasters, acknowledged, avoided, and never negotiated with. The idea that one might have extended judgment rather than annihilation destabilized centuries of carefully maintained fear. Worse, it had chosen a human. A species already known for its inconvenient resilience and refusal to remain within assigned limitations. Kane was summoned to testify. He was escorted through corridors that felt narrower than they had any right to be, watched by eyes that belonged to creatures far more dangerous than any battlefield enemy he remembered. None of them spoke to him unless protocol demanded it. None of them met his gaze for long. The chamber itself was an echoing expanse of light and levitation platforms. Kane stood at its center alone, hands unclasped, posture still. When asked to explain what he had encountered, he chose his words carefully. "I didn't survive," he said. "I was evaluated." The admission rippled through the council members. Some recoiled. Others leaned forward. Kane felt the mark on his shoulder warm slightly, not in warning but in acknowledgement. He resisted the urge to shift. The council's response was neither united nor patient. Some factions demanded Kane's immediate detainment and dissection, arguing that any human altered by an apex predator constituted an existential threat. Others saw potential leverage. If humans could be marked instead of destroyed, perhaps the predators could be influenced, redirected, or weaponized. Kane listened without reacting. He had stood in rooms like this before, when lives became statistics and ethics bent to convenience. The vocabulary changed, but the intent did not. He was released under observation not because they trusted him, but because no one wanted responsibility if something went wrong. He returned to his ship with a watcher drone sealed behind his bulkhead and standing clearance restrictions that followed him like a shadow. The first attempt on his life came less than a day later. It was subtle. There were no dramatic explosions or blaring alerts. Just a maintenance lift malfunctioning at precisely the wrong moment, its magnetic clamps releasing as Kane stepped inside. He reacted without thought, muscles moving before fear could register. He caught the edge of the shaft with one hand, strength surging through him with an unfamiliar efficiency, and hauled himself back with a speed that surprised even him. The drone captured everything. Analysts would later replay the footage frame by frame, arguing over acceleration curves and muscle strain ratios that no longer aligned with baseline human capability. Kane barely noticed. His focus was locked on the sensation spreading through his chest, that same cold clarity he had felt under the predator's gaze. The mark had responded. Not aggressively. Precisely. After that, the attempts grew bolder. Independent mercenary groups began to track him, unbound by council law and motivated by reward offers that grew with every failed measure. To some, Kane was proof of concept. To others, he was a walking violation of natural order. They tested him in the station's underlevels, in cargo bays, in the dead spaces between legal oversight and desperate ambition. Kane did not hunt them. He didn't need to. Each confrontation ended the same way, fast, efficient, and just short of lethal. He defended himself with a restraint that unsettled those who studied the reports. No unnecessary strikes. No indulgence. The predator's judgment lingered in his decisions, shaping force into control rather than excess. Word spread quickly. Whatever the human carried, it was not madness. It was discipline sharpened beyond recognition. As pressure mounted, so did Kane's awareness. He began to sense disturbances long before scanners registered them, brief flickers of hostility that brushed against him like static before storms. He slept less, not from fear but from a growing certainty that distance no longer meant separation. Not truly. The council's final deliberation came with armed escorts and rehearsed neutrality. They offered protection in exchange for compliance, study in exchange for safety. Kane considered the terms, felt the subtle pull at his senses, and understood what they did not. The predator's territory had never been something he escaped. It had let him leave. Kane declined the offer, disabled the Watcher drone before it could protest, and filed an outbound trajectory with no return vector. As his ship slipped free of the station's gravity well, systems flickering in anticipation, he felt the mark respond, steady, patient, and unmistakably directional. Somewhere beyond mapped space, the mouth was waiting. And this time, Elias Kane was not being called as prey. Elias Kane crossed back into the mouth without hesitation, and the universe did not resist him. Where his instruments had once failed in panic, they now stabilized into a quiet, unnerving compliance. The darkness beyond the threshold no longer felt like an abyss but a corridor, vast and deliberate, as if the expanse itself had narrowed its focus to allow his passage. Kane stood from his pilot's seat as alarms remained silent and the ship cut cleanly through gravitational distortions that should not have been survivable. The planet rose beneath him again, scarred and immense, its surface unchanged yet undeniably aware. Kane felt it in the subtle tension beneath his skin, the same way a soldier sensed a battlefield before the first shot was fired. He landed near the same jagged ridges, though he did not consciously guide the descent. Something else corrected his approach. This time he was not alone for long. The lesser predators emerged first, their forms sinuous and armored, eyes glinting in reflected starlight. They did not stalk him. They repositioned around him, forming a silent perimeter that moved as Kane moved, maintaining distance without menace. Every step he took was echoed by a ripple through the ash-laden ground, as though presence itself had weight here. When Vorkael revealed itself, the sky seemed to bow. The apex predator's arrival pressed the air into something dense and electric. Kane felt the familiar pressure return, stronger now but no longer suffocating. It was recognition, not scrutiny. The vast creature regarded him with the same ancient eyes, and for the first time since their encounter, Kane did not feel small. The mark on his shoulder burned, sending a lattice of sensation through his nervous system. Images rose again, sharper than before, star systems rendered lifeless, predator kin brought down by weapons that tore through flesh and world alike. These were not memories offered for pity. They were warnings. Vorkael was dying. Its kind had always stood apart from the politics of lesser species, maintaining balance through selective extinction rather than conquest. That detachment had become vulnerability. The galaxy had learned their patterns, measured their restraint, and decided that any force unwilling to expand beyond its territory could be erased. Mercenary fleets were already moving. Kane absorbed the knowledge with the same grim practicality that had carried him through human wars. He understood asymmetry when he saw it. Vorkael was a singular power facing a dispersed, coordinated threat. Strength alone would not be enough. It needed something it did not possess. Adaptability. The predator stepped closer, lowering its immense head until its crown loomed over Kane. There was no ritual circle carved into the ground, no ceremonial display. The bond that followed was raw and efficient, stripped of ornament the way true violence always was. Pain took him without warning. The mark over his shoulder flared white-hot, spreading across his chest and spine as if his nerves had been laid bare. Cain staggered but did not fall. He braced himself against the influx, teeth clenched as something far larger than himself pressed into his awareness. Instinct collided with instinct. Human discipline met predator calculus. He felt scaled muscle remembered through borrowed sensation, killed and survived through thousands of cycles. He felt the ruthless patience of something that waited centuries to strike once and strike correctly. Each fragment threatened to tear him apart, to overwrite the self he had fought to preserve. Cain stayed. He anchored himself to the discipline his trainers had carved into him. Breath, focus, acceptance of pain without surrender. He let the bond wash through him, filtered by a will refined not by dominance but by endurance. When it ended, Cain collapsed to one knee, gasping, the world spinning briefly before snapping back into clarity. Vorkael withdrew, its massive form swaying once before steadying. The exchange had cost it. Cain could feel that truth settle into him alongside something heavier. Authority. The predators around them reacted instantly. Heads lowered. Bodies aligned. The perimeter reformed with Cain unconsciously at its center. The realization struck him with unsettling force. The bond was not symbolic. It was functional. He was now part of their hierarchy. There was no time to process it before the first signs of invasion flickered into being at the edge of perception. Cain felt them before they appeared on his ship's sensors. Warp signatures tearing through space with crude aggression. Mercenaries. Dozens of vessels, bristling with weapons designed to kill things the galaxy feared. Cain rose to his feet, the motion smoother than it had been moments before. His awareness extended beyond his own body now, mapping the terrain, the predators' positions, the angles of approach. He did not issue commands. He did not need to. The predators moved because he moved. Cain looked up at Vorkael, meeting the ancient creature's gaze once more. There was no gratitude there, no plea. Only acknowledgement of shared burden. The war would begin here, not with a charge or a roar, but with something far more dangerous. For the first time in the predator's long history, it was not facing extinction alone. Elias Cain crossed back into the mouth without hesitation, and the universe did not resist him. Where his instruments had once failed in panic, they now stabilized into a quiet, unnerving compliance. The darkness beyond the threshold no longer felt like an abyss but a corridor, vast and deliberate, as if the expanse itself had narrowed its focus to allow his passage. Cain stood from the pilot's seat as alarms remained silent and the ship cut cleanly through gravitational distortions that should not have been survivable. The planet rose beneath him again, scarred and immense, its surface unchanged yet undeniably aware. Cain felt it in the subtle tension beneath his skin, the same way a soldier sensed a battlefield before the first shot was fired. He landed near the same jagged ridges, though he did not consciously guide the descent. Something else corrected his approach. This time he was not alone for long. The lesser predators emerged first, their forms sinuous and armored, eyes glinting in reflected starlight. They did not stalk him. They repositioned around him, forming a silent perimeter that moved as Cain moved, maintaining distance without menace. Every step he took was echoed by a ripple through the ash-laden ground, as though presence itself had weight here. When Vorkael revealed itself, the sky seemed to bow. The apex predator's arrival pressed the air into something dense and electric. Cain felt the familiar pressure return, stronger now but no longer suffocating. It was recognition, not scrutiny. The vast creature regarded him with the same ancient eyes, and for the first time since their encounter, Cain did not feel small. The mark on his shoulder burned, sending a lattice of sensation through his nervous system. Images rose again, sharper than before, star systems rendered lifeless, predator kin brought down by weapons that tore through flesh and world alike. These were not memories offered for pity. They were warnings. Vorkael was dying. Its kind had always stood apart from the politics of lesser species, maintaining balance through selective extinction rather than conquest. That detachment had become vulnerability. The galaxy had learned their patterns, measured their restraint, and decided that any force unwilling to expand beyond its territory could be erased. Mercenary fleets were already moving. Cain absorbed the knowledge with the same grim practicality that had carried him through human wars. He understood asymmetry when he saw it. Vorkael was a singular power facing a dispersed, coordinated threat. Strength alone would not be enough. It needed something it did not possess. Adaptability. The predator stepped closer, lowering its immense head until its crown loomed over Cain. There was no ritual circle carved into the ground, no ceremonial display. The bond that followed was raw and efficient, stripped of ornament the way true violence always was. Pain took him without warning. The mark over his shoulder flared white-hot, spreading across his chest and spine as if his nerves had been laid bare. Cain staggered but did not fall. He braced himself against the influx, teeth clenched as something far larger than himself pressed into his awareness. Instinct collided with instinct. Human discipline met predator calculus. He felt scaled muscle remembered through borrowed sensation, killed and survived through thousands of cycles. He felt the ruthless patience of something that waited centuries to strike once and strike correctly. Each fragment threatened to tear him apart, to overwrite the self he had fought to preserve. Cain stayed. He anchored himself to the discipline his trainers had carved into him. Breath, focus, acceptance of pain without surrender. He let the bond wash through him, filtered by a will refined not by dominance but by endurance. When it ended, Cain collapsed to one knee, gasping, the world spinning briefly before snapping back into clarity. Vorkael withdrew, its massive form swaying once before steadying. The exchange had cost it. Cain could feel that truth settle into him alongside something heavier. Authority. The predators around them reacted instantly. Heads lowered. Bodies aligned. The perimeter reformed with Cain unconsciously at its center. The realization struck him with unsettling force. The bond was not symbolic. It was functional. He was now part of their hierarchy. There was no time to process it before the first signs of invasion flickered into being at the edge of perception. Cain felt them before they appeared on his ship's sensors. Warp signatures tearing through space with crude aggression. Mercenaries. Dozens of vessels, bristling with weapons designed to kill things the galaxy feared. Cain rose to his feet, the motion smoother than it had been moments before. His awareness extended beyond his own body now, mapping the terrain, the predators' positions, the angles of approach. He did not issue commands. He did not need to. The predators moved because he moved. Cain looked up at Vorkael, meeting the ancient creature's gaze once more. There was no gratitude there, no plea. Only acknowledgement of shared burden. The war would begin here, not with a charge or a roar, but with something far more dangerous. For the first time in the predator's long history, it was not facing extinction alone. The first missiles screamed through the void long before the mercenary fleets themselves were visible. Elias Cain felt the vibrations through the hull of his ship as though the expanse itself had shuddered in warning. He did not panic. He had learned patience in human wars, discipline in predator judgment, and now, in this perfect fusion, he had control. Every nerve, every muscle, every thought aligned with a singular purpose: survive, adapt, and lead. Vorkael appeared above the battlefield, immense and terrifying, every movement sending ripples across the ash plains below. The predator's form dwarfed even the largest capital vessels, and its roar, less sound than pure resonance, shattered smaller craft before they could fire. Cain moved through the chaos with uncanny precision, anticipating attacks before they happened, avoiding destruction not by luck, but by understanding the rhythms of predator combat. His mind and body were one with Vorkael's awareness. He felt its pain as it endured projectile strikes that would have shattered a lesser form. He absorbed its strategy as instinct, weaving human cunning into alien foresight. This was no longer a battle between species. It was a single entity, two halves of a whole, striking with a harmony no one had expected and none could counter. Human reinforcements arrived, drawn not by orders but by the same invisible gravity that had marked Cain. Ships bristled with energy weapons, drones and soldiers, all coordinating seamlessly under his silent guidance. The galaxy had underestimated humans for centuries, assuming their endurance was limited to stubborn survival. Cain now demonstrated that it extended to orchestrating the impossible, turning instinct and adaptation into war itself. The first engagement hit like a storm. Mercenary cruisers attempted to encircle the apex predator, hoping brute force could overpower its sheer size. They were wrong. Cain guided Vorkael through a sequence of calculated maneuvers. Heavy blasts redirected, graviton fields disrupted, smaller ships dismantled before they could react. Every strike the predator executed was precise, surgical, each one carrying the weight of both species' understanding of combat. On the ground, the lesser predators spread out like shadows given life. They struck from angles no human mind could anticipate, collapsing positions with devastating efficiency. Cain moved among them, coordinating with a subtle shift in posture or a glance, guiding attacks with the same silent authority he had displayed when first marked. Soldiers under his influence executed tactics they had never trained for, their fear replaced with a focus that bordered on reverence. And yet, amidst the orchestrated chaos, Kane's awareness caught a subtle anomaly. A stealth cruiser approaching the planet's core, laden with antimatter charges capable of annihilating the apex predator in a single strike. Human soldiers had missed it. Drones had ignored it. But he saw it, felt it, calculated it in microseconds. He moved alone, descending into the predator's territory where only he could follow, instinct guiding him faster than any vessel or suit could endure. The ground trembled as he ran, the smaller predators parting instinctively to allow passage. The ship launched countermeasures he had pre-programmed, each strike detonating precisely to mask his approach. When he reached the stealth cruiser, the world seemed to narrow into a single axis of confrontation. Kane's hand hovered over the control console, knowing that hesitation would cost everything. The antimatter core was active, its timer blinking down. Using the combined understanding granted by the bond, he interfaced with the systems. Not hacking, not brute force, but guiding them, predicting the sequence of failsafes, manipulating the machinery with a precision born from predator instincts and human adaptability. The core detonated, but safely. The stealth cruiser was shredded, its threat neutralized without destroying the surrounding terrain. Kane emerged, chest heaving, his body a vessel of controlled exhaustion. He felt Vorkel's presence behind him, immense and approving, though no words passed between them. Gratitude was unnecessary. Survival, victory, and legacy were sufficient. The remaining mercenary forces faltered as the apex predator and human coalition pushed forward. Ships retreated, weapons fell silent under the overwhelming precision and unexpected coordination of two species fused in purpose. The galaxy watched in disbelief as what had once been a natural predator now acted as an extension of humanity's potential, an alliance of flesh, instinct, and indomitable will. Kane stood on the ash-strewn plains as the last attackers withdrew. Vorkel's massive form loomed above him, unbowed but weary, its survival now secured not by age or strength alone, but by the human who had been marked, tempered, and elevated to warrior beyond measure. Kane's chest burned with the echo of the bond, the residue of power and awareness that now defined him in ways he had never imagined. He understood what it meant to be chosen. Not as a commander, not as a soldier, not as a savior, but as the bridge between two species. The apex predator's life coursed through him, tempered by human discipline, and humanity's potential surged outward, recognized and feared across the galaxy. Kane looked toward the stars, aware that his existence had rewritten expectation, that no council, no mercenary, no observer would ever underestimate humanity again. Vorkel lowered its massive head, brushing against Kane in a gesture that transcended communication. Kane felt a single thought pass through him without words. Survival is not the victory. Becoming the one worth standing beside, that is. And Elias Kane, human veteran, chosen warrior, apex-bonded sentinel, stepped forward. The galaxy had been warned. The mouth had been transformed. And humanity, for the first time, had earned its place not by conquest, but by endurance, adaptation, and the courage to walk where none had returned. The stars waited and Kane would meet them.